Hello and welcome to this panel. And today we're going to speaking on shaking up the booking model post-COVID. So we really want to talk about, in a new world where the models and mechanics that have already existed in booking pre-COVID, do they still exist today? And is there other aspects that we can look at and discuss and find maybe a fairer deal for all in this process? One that benefits everyone across the live music ecosphere, from artists, managers, agents, promoters, venues, crew, and everyone across the board. So just to introduce everyone else on the panel and let them introduce themselves. Hi, Roxanne. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry, was that me?
Yeah.
Hello, that was a bit sudden. Hi, my name's ROXANNE BASTION. I'm an artist and board director of the FAC.
And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sarah Joy. I'm a booking agent at ATC Live, which is an independent booking agency based in London.
And KAIYA, would you like to introduce? Is that exactly how you spell it?
I'm MILAN. I am an artist manager and work with a variety of different artists, from Steam Down to Anansi and Afronotsu.
And John, finally.
Hi, I'm John. I chair the Association of Independent Promoters, a trade body, a quite new trade body there to support people who promote concerts and club nights in the UK.
And finally, I'm Nathan from BRUDENELL in Leeds. And I think we started where I'd like to kind of kick off and say that I think it's clear that everyone wants to get back to a level of where artists can play, venues can exist, shows are happening, and we all want to do this when it is safe and responsible to do so. So a little bit of the position with the booking model that we might want to look at might be, is there a way we can extrapolate a fair position that understands everyone within the artist chain and the music ecosphere, from the artist, manager, agent, promoter, venue, audience also, and the stakeholders in that booking process, and the different things that each can cover? So looking at each individual roles, would we go through that and see what position we're in now and kind of look at where we can go to next with this, if that makes sense? Who wants to start on that from their position? John, maybe?
Yeah, happy to do that. I mean, so from a promoter's position, I mean, shows only happen. You need artists, you need an audience, you need a venue, and you need a promoter. You need all those people to exist, and you need all the backstage staff and the crew. But the promoter is the person, whoever that is. It might be an independent promoter who is just somebody who puts on shows, or it might be a venue that books in-house. But you need someone who basically says, do you know what, I'm going to pay to hire a venue, I'm going to pay for some marketing, I'm going to book some staff, and I'm going to take a risk on a show. You need that bit to as that's a real starting point, right? And you know, you need those people to then sort of engage with the rest of the sector to try and make a show happen. And I think that, like, what we've seen, promoters have long thought, you know what, the whole way that booking, surely things could be better in some ways. But prior to COVID, everybody was so busy. It's really hard to make those changes. I think during COVID, we've got some time to explore these changes, but also it's really shown that some of the things that exist are real problems right now. So I just outlined, there's a lot of cost that a promoter puts forward into putting a show on. And if we just talk about people that aren't really worth tickets, that sounds horrible, actually. If we talk about the difference between someone who's definitely worth lots of tickets, and that's why they're touring, or versus someone where you're working a lot harder to try and bring an audience together and everybody wants that show to happen, that's quite a lot of money to put out. And so some things that we've noticed already is, as a promoter, you pay an artist a fee, and you quite often pay a deposit. And if a deposit sits in a bank somewhere for 6 months, that's money. Instead of being in a bank, why can't that money, why let's have no deposits or smaller deposits, because then that way, as an example, promoters could put more shows on, right? We know that in the grassroots there's a whole administrative burden about putting a show on, you know, the whole booking it, doing a budget, the support confirmations, the artwork approval, and there's quite a lot of things. Maybe we could make that a lot easier or a lot more streamlined, and for everybody that would then enable promoters or everybody to put more shows on. You know, there's some crazy rider requests that come in that we get from emerging artists that for some, or the ecosystem has allowed for there to be these big riders where actually maybe if they were more focused on what the artist actually needs, which is sometimes like, you know, they just really want to be welcomed and received to a town, that would enable people to put more shows on. So just like things like that that could change, that would make that process from a promoter perspective, enable them to put more shows on, basically to have more time to put more concerts on.
So essentially reshaping the deal, not just shaking it up, but reshaping it so that it can give or allow promoters or venues the opportunity to take more risks on shows because their finances aren't as tied up. Is that where you're leading to?
Some of it is about finance, yeah. So we all know that promoting, again, at all levels is risky, but certainly in the grassroots is more risky because you don't even know, you know, that artist might not be worth that many tickets. We all know that, you know, you've got to pay the venue, you've got to pay the staff. You can't sort of say to them, if nobody turns up, I won't pay you. We know that the artists are touring on tiny budgets and they're struggling as well, but the margins are incredibly tight. The idea, I was involved in a webinar on Monday, and in the past, 30 years ago, artist fees were quite low. And the promoter, when you made an offer, you offered the artist a certain amount, and in your budget, you built in a promoter. It was called a promoter profit, but it was a promoter fee. So I'm going to pay the artist £100, and I, as a promoter, am also going to get £100. And if we cover all of that, after that, we then split the profits at 70-30, 30 years ago. And those have gone now. Now it's like, if we break even, so there's no promoter building, there's no venue building at all. And then if we break even, the artist is going to get 80% or 85% of the money, and the promoter is going to take the last 15. And that just doesn't, I mean, that's crazy. Promoters put all that time and effort and money in. I'm also, you know, I'm not saying it's also easy for the artist either, but we've got to this kind of very difficult position. So surely we want promoters to be able to be sustainable, because we want them to put shows on in the towns, because we want them to bring artists in. So we have to think about things like maybe we should go back and there should be a promoter fee of £100, which is probably not enough to cover their time, in the same way £100 isn't enough to cover the artist, but at least they know they're going to get something.
So if I move on essentially to the next person that would be in the chain, if I speak as a venue promoter, you're the promoter, the next person in the chain would be Sarah as the agent who would arrange this.
Yeah.
And so where would your position be? Because just going in it from if I was saying from a venue promoter and I put this hat on, what we're all looking for essentially is a fair deal for all. Nobody wants to see any part of the industry lose out. Nobody wants to do anyone over or see anyone go financially, you know, not rewarded fairly. So I think from your point of view, in the middle, the person that brokers the deals, it'd be great to hear where you're coming from on this.
Yeah, it's a difficult position currently to sort of be in, to be honest, because what we're trying to do is essentially we're the spokesperson for the artist. So our main priority as an agent is to make sure that the deal is as financially, you know, sound as possible and in the favour of the artist. So at the same time as trying to support independent promoters and independent venues, which is something that ATC, you know, we're an independent agency too, it's something that we're quite enthusiastic about. There is also, you know, making sure that the deals are in the favour of the artist, and the artist walks out with the, you know, the profit that they deserve. And at the end of the day, the artist is the one, you know, who is selling the tickets. I mean, I sound like such an agent now. This is, but ultimately, you know, that's it's the artist's work and the artist who is selling the show. So, you know, it's a difficult line to sort of walk down in making sure that the promoter gets the acknowledgement that they deserve and the financial profit that they deserve, whilst also protecting the artist as the kind of entity. So yeah, as we go on, it's quite an interesting time to be an agent and trying to get that line completely, you know.
I think on that later in the discussion, I'd like to come back to the potential of realizing the springboard that a promoter gives and the spotlight and the other kind of avenues that maybe someone, an established promoter, gives, someone like Now Wave or us as a venue, BRUDENELL in Leeds, or you know, Synergy 432 in Glasgow. I think that's what I'd like to cover a little bit as well, so a level parity. But yeah, anything else before we move over to manager from your position right now?
No,
okay,
I think that's it. I think you're right. There is a, you know, credit where credit is due. The promoters do a lot, but yeah, I guess the agent is sitting right in the middle of the, you know, the two veins of thought on this.
And there's also, we also realise that at times that there is sometimes people in the industry that don't do the best jobs from all sides. So we have to acknowledge that, you know, and the levels of best practice that maybe, you know, AIP and others want to try and uphold in future. Moving on to manager, KAIYA, where would you see post-COVID moving in a new deal and other kind of things, the best for the industry?
I think what we found from this COVID period is that the artists have been left to shelve a lot of the burdens, the financial burdens, in cancelling shows and having already booked hotels, and kind of everyone saying, well, there's nothing much we can do. And I think post-COVID, artists being able to offset those burdens, I'd say, in different ways. For example, I think a lot of, some labels that I've spoken to are really heavily providing tour support. And obviously that's for signed artists and not necessarily for independent artists, but providing tour support. And I can see that even accountants and stuff are trying to figure out ways that they can kind of provide artists loans, for example, to pay for tour support in the future. A lot of the deals that I've seen for events post-COVID have left it kind of just like the promoter may cancel and then you may lose money, and that's just a reality of what we're facing moving into a post-COVID sort of live industry. But I think that a way where the artist is not left with the complete financial burden could really help in the future. Obviously it's not been great for the promoters, just in general. Promoters have lost a lot of money, but in the same breath, artists have lost a significant amount of money, plus the fee that they're then not getting paid as well. So something where maybe they still kind of are able to claim half their fee, where that comes from probably needs to be negotiated between the promoter and further down the line where a label is involved or some sort of institution.
And so moving on to Roxanne, from an artist perspective.
Well, from an artist perspective, we're very much in the middle of all of this, so I can't see this as anything other than an holistic thing. One thing I would say, well, two things I'd like to say. I think part of the problem historically has been like the complete lack of regulation in the sector. So, you know, anyone can call themselves a promoter and propose some kind of deal, just like I suppose anyone can release a track and say that they can sell X amount of tickets. So a lot of this is education, I think. And I suppose I'm perhaps in a unique position or in a lucky position where I feel like I've had all of your jobs. You know, for many independent artists, it's a really good thing to know to book your own tour or to have the financial risk of hiring a venue and selling your own tickets. because only if you've done all of those things can you appreciate how hard it is. And I hope that that makes for a better working together when you do get to that stage of working together. So yeah, so I see myself as sort of the glue in the middle of all of this, or the lukewarm water, to give a music movie reference. Okay.
And just to go over that,
Yeah.
do you think there is, from an artist point of view, a kind of linear talking of from the venue through the promoter sometimes, or the venue is the promoter, and through the agent to the manager to the artist, that conversation really is clear and comes through with a lot of the time? Or do you think that could actually be made easier, certainly in a post-technological age where there shouldn't be any barriers significantly to talking to each other, as long as each other are looking out for the best interests of one another? I think it goes back to that regulation kind of part, where everyone respects that the agent's got a part and the manager's got a part and everyone's got a part in the process. But there are times where a venue might need some level of artistic input pretty fast, or, you know, that needs to be flexible on something. Do you think there's some levels of that booking process and artistic process that can be improved, and levels of gatekeepership broken down? Put that to everybody.
If I can start, like, absolutely, that's such a good question. And like, firstly, I can't believe I went to a Spinal Tap reference in the first question. I'm sorry about that. But it's interesting. So I have worked with agents in the past and done it myself. And the clearer the communication, the better. But again, I think this goes back to the education point, because so many artists, myself included, don't know what questions to ask. So if we as an industry could do a better job in educating everyone in just, yeah, what we do, so the more we view this industry as like an holistic thing and not little separate bits, the better. So for instance, when I worked with an agent, because part of that communication was removed, the communication sometimes wasn't as smooth as when there were fewer like links in the chain, just updates as to where are we with ticket sales, what can I do to help you do your job better, and vice versa. So I definitely think that's something that can be improved.
And do you think that there's something that I know there's been conversations between you and John, or
Yeah.
FAC and AIP, on some level of charter standard or something kind of work in progress? Do you think across the board there could be this kind of level of, certainly for agents as well, and for everyone, that you know, a level of benchmark, should we say, that people should adhere to, you know, best practices across the board, that there shouldn't be those kind of things that go on in the industry that do necessarily happen in music that don't happen in other business practices outside of it? Do you think that's something we could explore in post-COVID, in a time where agencies like CA have just made several redundancies, you know, 100 redundancies across the board? When you look at management companies, they're doing it across the world, the global ones. When we look at promoters who are looking at their own industries that might need to make redundancies, do you think that there's benchmark standards that we can come up that tie in with that education? John, would you like to feedback on that, or anyone else?
I mean, I'd say yes. I mean, it's really important to point out, don't necessarily need technological, I can't say it, solutions. I think like one of the solutions we've already found is creating something like the Association of Independent Promoters. So it's a new organization. To be clear, we don't represent all promoters. So somebody just mentioned the rogue ones. Anyone can be a promoter. We don't represent any of those kind of fly-by-night types, or, you know, pay to play types. You know, it's, you've got to meet certain criteria to become a part of us. But yeah, one of the conversations we had quite early on was meeting with ROXANNE and FAC. Brilliant conversation, just putting loads of artists together with us representing promoters to have a conversation, and we began to fix things. We began to have conversations, open conversations, like, what, you know, like, why is the support fee this amount, and it's, you know, or, and it's, you know, because of there hasn't been a group of people together to go, how can we change that, and have a conversation like this. And, you know, independent agents, I think through COVID are recognizing that agencies, and Sarah will speak for agencies, but they're busy doing their own thing. And during COVID, actually, a lot of the independent agents have begun to talk a lot more and talk to groups like us to go, how can we all work together better? How can we do things? So just these conversations are creating solutions like this conversation will lead to.
That's definitely true. I mean, traditionally, agents completely swim in their own streams, and there's like it's almost like because you're competitors, and unfortunately, the agent world is extremely competitive. There is very little communication between different agencies. But if there is one good thing to come out of COVID in terms of agent world, it is that there is a lot of open communication now about types of deals, about contracting, you know, putting in clauses around COVID, around festival rescheduling. You know, there was a whole conversation about whether everyone was going to push for higher fees on rescheduling, depending on where artists were in their campaigns. And obviously we all talked about that across different agencies. So that is definitely something that's happened in the last sort of 4 to 5 months, is a lot more communication between the agents.
And Sarah made a good point before, you know, like essentially the agent represents the artist, right? That's, I think a lot of good agencies and agents like Sarah will be also considerate about the venue and the promoter and try and understand their needs, but ultimately they represent the artist. They're going on a journey with that artist. So until someone like us comes forward and says, hey, so there's something Sarah just said, which is not your fault, Sarah, but I've realized we need to change the term of, use the term promoter profit. And I've realized that's a really bad use of term, because actually the promoter needs a fee to get paid, right? And that's, so we should start to change that language. And I think if we open up that conversation, say, okay, it's reasonable that the promoter gets paid something, right? In the same way it's reasonable the artist gets paid something. And like KAIYA said, that's something that you get probably isn't what you actually need, but it's about something. But we wouldn't say the artist fee is an artist profit. And the promoter,
I think we also need to realise that everyone in the industry, you know, the manager existing needs a fee, the agent needs a fee, and it really does show. I mean, I'd like to get KAIYA's input as well on it from a manager side about the original question about the linear relationship, that sometimes there needs to be that quick reaction that maybe an agent is off or a manager's not there and things like that. But there definitely needs to be this finding a fair deal that helps everyone. But how can we fund it, and how can we find it funding? And certainly in a time where you mentioned something earlier about, you know, established artists and the cost that they have on a tour. But if we're just supporting established artists, then how do we get the new ones platform, and how can we guarantee them that their costs are going to be covered also if they don't have an audience? So I'm keen to get your perspective as a manager too.
I think we're talking about all the different sort of components of, I guess, the live experience, but in terms of promoters, definitely need to get paid a promoter fee. Sometimes a lot of promoters are taking losses. Reality in a lot of live shows, especially when the artist is not heavily established or doesn't have a large audience, or the promoter is just taking risk on the artist because they think they're amazing. The same thing with the manager. A lot of the time, we do on this side we do talk about artist profit, John, in terms of, you know, if a fee, for example, is £3,000, once we pay our musicians, I don't think fees are always based upon the experience that the artist is providing, for example. So if we have, you know, it's normal for us to have about 8 musicians on tour, those musicians also need to get paid a fee. That's fair, and when a lot of the time it's not fair for a lot of musicians, if you kind of go into the model of the artist, and then the manager kind of gets lugged with the 20% of whatever the artist gets, because that's who the manager manages, and that could end up being like £20 when you're doing like a one-off gig, and those things come into play when you're doing touring, for example, and then you can lug that money together a bit more. But everyone needs to be paid. The agent needs to be paid. Agents mostly are working on a percentage basis, and we all are to some degree. And unfortunately, the money is just not enough, and it doesn't really pull together. Even if the artist is singing around, like, you know, 1,000 cats paying you and selling it out. I think what we're going to see moving forward is a lot of brands getting involved and using brand sponsorship as a way to sort of up the money for everybody. And that's something that we've discussed with our agents about, trying to see how we can put brands and pair them with the artist, something that makes sense, and then offering maybe audiences some sort of giveaway to promote the brand, but then also being able to use that brand's sponsorship and finance to then add to that fee and pay the promoter properly, and pay obviously the agent and the artist and the manager together.
Do you think there's a discussion on that though, where when a sponsorship comes forward, or when some other income comes into the deal, that always isn't discussed fairly about the split where it should go, that is instantly from some parts, and I'm not saying these on this call, but some others in the industry that seem to be instantly wanting to land grab that fee for themselves for the end thing, and that we need to be that more holistic, open kind of view on everybody needs some kind of reward at the point for their input, and the fairly.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of understanding for the food chain, and I think people don't, especially in 2020, the role of a promoter, probably from a traditional promoter to now, has slightly changed. And I do recognize from a management perspective that promoters are relying on the artist a lot of the time to sell the tickets and not actually promoting the shows directly, which I think there's a grey area, because if from an artist perspective, if they are selling all the tickets, then the idea is, well, why are we paying this promoter, you know, whatever percent to do this show? It doesn't necessarily make sense. And I've seen a lot of budgets put together that aren't necessarily realistic. I think there's a lot of fees that are added, especially to do with marketing, that are not actually being used on marketing, and it's relying on the artists to use their marketing assets and their social media to promote shows. And promoters a lot of the time are asking artists to do a lot more than they ever had to do before to sell out a show. It's something that I'm experiencing. So I think that there's a sort of there's a misunderstanding of what the promoter does now, which I think needs to be more clearly defined, so that if an artist knows that someone's putting in a lot of work for them, there's no reason, for a reasonable artist, there's no reason why they wouldn't want to pay the promoter and anyone else along in the food chain.
So just to, can I bring some up, John, just to play devil's advocate on that in two aspects. One is that sometimes as a promoter and venue, we struggle at times to get the artist to promote themselves as well. There's sometimes a stigma in a modern kind of society that the artist feels like it's someone else's job, whether that's the promoter or the label or the venue. I know that's not typical of all artists, but there's definitely this at times within certain areas that just the music will do the speaking, when actually that's not the case. You need to have a 360 view and a team working together on it. But from a promoter view, and something that's been big discussions across promoters across the board, has been up until a certain level, is there an argument that a really good flat fee where everyone knows where they stand is better, so that up to a certain capacity, so there isn't this on the balance sheet where the costs are going, so that at the end of it, the artist can walk away knowing this was a great show. At the end of it, everyone else knows where they stand. There isn't a tour manager standing over a promoter or a venue going, why is there £20 on this marketing, when everyone's walked into a deal, everyone's had a great show, and everyone knows where they're going with it. Is there an argument to look at flat fees up until a certain capacity in some ways? Is that a conversation you've had, obviously, John?
Yeah.
And how would others react to that?
Yeah, I think what KAIYA's I'm interested in what Kai is saying. There's this view sometimes that, well, a promoter isn't. I'm confused by this whole promotion isn't working. There isn't any artist in the UK that doesn't use a promoter to promote their shows. There is always a promoter involved. There is a promoter or a venue who's booking and paying for the shows. Adele doesn't use a traditional promoter, but she uses her agency. Adele doesn't pay for the show. And in COVID, I mean, are you more likely or less likely after COVID to, if an artist was wanting to do their very own shows and pay their own money, would you be more likely or less likely to do it? The answer is less likely, because all of that risk sits with the promoter. So it's not about, I understand that you think, if you think that an artist is worth tickets, that there is kind of nothing to do, but I think that's a very unhelpful attitude about the role of the promoter. First of all, the promoter at that level is paying for that show to happen, and all kinds of things might stop that show being the success that the artist is worth. The artist might take to social media with unhelpful views. It might rain heavily. The local football team might make the FA Cup final. You can have all kinds of other things, but basically promoters, I mean, artists don't continue to do. Ed Sheeran doesn't promote his own shows.
But John, is that not something that we have to differentiate between established artists and growing artists? And that's the point. And that's the point I'm trying to make on the capacity level. Is there a certain capacity level whereby everyone is comfortable on what is achievable, and at least the risk is managed and known? The artist knows what fees they are getting. They are guaranteed this as much as a guarantee. The other side of it is, yes, there might be some other bonuses in there, but when it comes down to a profit share split based on percentages, there's this sometimes what can be an amazing show. You've just sold 100 extra tickets on what you have projected, and you're arguing over £20 for some posters, which makes no sense because everyone's earning a lot more than what they went out to set out to do. And it's this weird little elephant gremlin in the room that sometimes can cloud this. And I think that, is there a way that we can work around that? That's just another push, and that's why I think it's just interesting to put that to everyone. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's different for established and for breaking artists. Roxanne, Arthur?
I think that comes to like what we were talking about, code of practice, though, because that is a trust issue or a trust problem, shall we say, between, I would instantly, as an agent, that would make me feel slightly dubious unless it was someone that I worked with frequently and I felt were a very honest promoter, because there has been a history of hiding costs in bad costings. I'm not saying every promoter does it, but it certainly traditionally has been something. So where there is a flat fee and looking at it like that, those conversations would still have to be open and on some level costed out so that everyone knew which money was going where. So yeah, that goes back to a code of having a code of conduct between promoters, I think. And
that's exactly why earlier I brought up that not every promoter plays by the rules. I have to say that as somebody that plays devil's advocate in moderating this and puts the hats on, you have to say that, from my point of view, when I'm looking at booking a show, there's different promoters in different cities that don't always play by those rules, and will do that. So we can understand that. And I think there definitely needs to be that code of conduct, especially as well with agents, like I say, that maybe do other deals under the table or try to do stuff with managers or whatever else. There's that across the whole industry that maybe we're looking at benchmarks. Sorry, Roxanne, you wanted to reply as well.
Just to say that while it's really, really hard to be in this industry, one of the good things is that especially artists have more choice now than ever. There's more opportunity to be more in control of your career and all your working relationships than ever. And I'm super interested in new models, whether that's, new, all roles are changing. So whether that's a new management model, it's a straight up partnership, or so to answer your question, if you reach a certain level and there are promoters that you enjoy working with and you want to try out a new model, I think that's fantastic that we're in an environment where that's possible and that can be explored. So many,
KAIYA, I think
they're just the way they are because that's the way they've been.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we're looking at is that just because the industry's works that way and established and built upon itself for countless years, does that mean it worked pre-COVID for everybody fairly, or were there other balances and checks we couldn't do to? KAIYA, were you asking for something? I don't know if you're muted.
I just wanted to say that in terms of the role of the promoter, I think that it's more the role of the manager needs to be clearly defined. The role of the artist in not just in traditional artist management situations, but even in terms of when it comes to like the live experience. With the artists I work with, the live experience kind of takes over even recorded experience a lot of the time, and I've been the promoter in a lot of situations, especially for grassroots artists. So I do understand it from John's perspective as well. I think it's more just artists expect a lot more than they ever did from their managers. Artists expect a lot more from their promoters than they ever did, and their agents. And I think what is their job and what is not their job really needs to be clearly defined when walking into situations. I also think the lack of show data that is available for previous artist shows could really help in terms of what you were saying, Nathan, about having some sort of flat fee up until a certain capacity. Because there is no sort of general database everyone uses. You can go on Spotify and you can see someone's streams, and you can go on Apple Music and see streams for your artist, but you can't see your artist show data from the time that they started up until being more established. And I think if promoters had more to go on, then it wouldn't be such a risk, even if it was like, oh, they've only ever done 100 capacity and they've sold it out. Because I've had experiences with the artists that I've worked with where I've had to argue with promoters and agents saying, an artist has already done 100 and 250 capacity shows. If you do this, it's not going to be good for the audience. And I've had a queue of 500 people down the street waiting to come into a show, and it's looked really bad on the manager. And I think if there was that data in advance, because a lot of the times when you're starting with a promoter or you're starting with the agent, you're starting from scratch. If they don't have all of that data backed up, that falls on the manager, I guess.
So a lot more transparency, to be honest, and like a toolbox that if there was you imagine if there was a regulatory toolbox where you could say, a new artist has got this many streams, a new artist has had this many shows, and there wasn't these ambiguous kind of things in the background of where they were going, then at least you pitching it to an agent to find the right agent, you pitching it to the right promoter, and across the board which venues they should go into would make that decision-making process a lot easier. And I think that's something that, again, you go back to the education. If those areas aren't really put together and there isn't the toolbox put forward and there isn't each individual agency or manager doing this, and that's the thing with the music industry a lot of the time is scattergun. It's just completely disparate. So yes, I think that we can go back to education. Is there toolboxes we can put together, and are there benchmarks we can go on? So just kind of moving on a little bit of things. Within the deal, is there things like green touring that we should look at? Catering on the rider. Should artists in a new age whereby we need to think about who an artist takes on tour in COVID times, because their tour party might not be that an engineer might not be able to use a desk if they're a breaking artist, or how much crew should they take, or can a promoter be expected to put a rider out on the table anymore and provide it considering the crossover contamination potential of COVID? Do all these new areas need to be explored that haven't been really discussed, that have come upon us in the last month or 2 months, that we now need to get ready for a new age that we can do and we can discuss in a deal like green touring, riders and catering? Thoughts on that?
I think everything is going to have more transparency, and I think those costs need to be considered early on at the point of booking almost. So what I've started, more and more, especially on the green touring aspect, more and more having those conversations, pre-tour, saying what do we want to eliminate, what costs do we want to cut or add to the catering, and making that almost building that into the deal and costings at the start of the tour rather than retrospectively trying to fit it. I think that's important, and I think that's somewhere that where we can sort of cut costs or at least control costs so that the deal is slightly more transparent.
Well, I think it depends on the size of the show, but again, like in the smaller shows, for sure, when you've got those sort of 100, 200 cap shows, a budget line of £50 or £75 for rider and national ad contribution is something else which is very controversial in those grassroots shows. If the priority, like if KAIYA as a manager is like, my priority is my artist needs to be paid, or we need to balance the book, then it's amazing. I think in the conversation with Roxanne, one of the things that we discovered is most artists don't realize they're effectively paying for the rider, right? We all are, but they're not. So if the artist has a choice, and quite a lot of promoters actually say to the artist, do you want the rider or do you want the money? They go, I want the money, because actually that's what they need.
You can keep your honey.
Yeah. And actually the thing that they do want, we hear again and again is, and Connell mentioned this in the webinar Monday, is they sort of want a few drinks and a bit of water and maybe a hot meal. That's what they want. So from that perspective, what's the artist's priority? Probably to balance the books and get paid, unless we can get the Arts Council or government to subsidise tours and venues, which is what we should be aiming for. But if they're not getting that, probably they want the cash. From a green and environmental perspective, how many show reps have we got who just tear their hair out at all the waste they throw at the end of the day? From a COVID perspective, does it make it safer? Yeah, clearly that's a thing that we could all easily address, because it would mean, it's a bit less administration, it's a smoother show, it's a safer show, and it's a bit more money for the artist. That to me is a win. National ad contributions in the grassroots is that's a huge topic, but in short, if you are the promoter who's going to be working with that act forever, and if you're the artist, then you want that national ad contribution, because that little show in the BRUDENELL is part of a bigger long journey. But if you are the BRUDENELL, who might only be seeing that artist for 2 shows before they get bigger, I'm not saying you would do this, Nathan, but some venues would go, well, why have I got that £50, £100 line in my budget when, I need to keep my venue from closing, or I'm a promoter not getting. So that's another thing where I'm sure there's a better solution.
Nathan, if I could add to the question, it's just interesting. This is a conversation we're having on the FAC board with artists such as Howard Jones, who tour like every year, all year round, and he's at a stage where he is thinking about the planet and isn't keen on flying to and fro from to the States every couple of months to tour. But this is what I mean with why it's so important to see this not as separate sectors, but the music industry as a whole, because for so long, for artists and their immediate teams, playing live and touring is the only way really to make money. And haven't we seen that now in this crisis? So that's why it's such an important moment to all get together and to see how we can reshape not just the booking model, but the entire thing, to make sure that we can continue to make music without ruining the planet.
Yeah, so to go on and bring KAIYA in from her perspective as a manager, and that discussion that would go across, I personally feel there needs to be a pretty quick discussion on things like this. What not just what the finances of the deal, but the mechanics that are in it and the other sides of it that go through it. And certainly catering is one of the ones that COVID provides a significant kind of interest, because we, an artist halfway through a tour gets infected through X, Y, and Z. But I think that there's definitely levels of this discussion that we can say. I mean, I've worked with established artists such as Hugh Cornwell, who go out and just get their own rider based on the fee that they do, in comparison to others at grassroots that want everything delivering on a plate. Now, it's just, again, education. but I'd be interested to hear what the manager in the middle, who has to represent the artist, their needs and wants and desires on a tour, against balancing it with the finance and thinking in a new age, is this practical? So from a manager's perspective, do you think there's a battle to have to actually bring expectations into what we might view as a new age right now?
I definitely think that there's a reality that we've been faced with, which is you make a certain amount of money from a show as profit for the artist, and out of that, the artist has to pay for what they need to pay for. What I think is there's certain things which need to be contextualized within the artist team, which is whether or not, you know, they even need a meal or whether or not they're going to eat at the hotel later. I think those are things which are just realities of the situation. Sometimes artists don't really want to eat; they'll eat if it's there. But from a management perspective, you might not really want us to have a heavy meal for a show. It might not be the best thing for them. And I think it's nice to have it, but there's certain things which they're not necessary. And I think we've just become accustomed to having these things on the rider. What something I found in general is that there's not enough water in the venue, which means that every time I have to run out and go and buy water from a shop or something. And those are things that could really be helpful, especially if you're not driving or whatever the reason is, to be able to just go out and get enough water that's going to be needed, not just for the artists, but also their band members as well. And I think not always are promoters prepared for who's actually going to be there. I have shows where an artist has got 30 people backstage and they want things for all of those 30 people. That's unrealistic for a promoter to be able to provide that. And I think there's from a manager's perspective, they might have already briefed those 20 other people that are not supposed to be there that you're not going to get anything from this rider. But then someone has a conversation with the promoter saying that we want more of this and we want more of that, and the promoter's kind of just putting their hair out trying to think, well, I wasn't prepared for all of this. So I think there needs to be like a reality check within who you're booking and who they're going to come with and what resources they really need, and that needs to be a conversation directly between the promoter and the manager. I think that even bypasses the agent from in a lot of ways, because of the fact that artists should get certain things, but there's a reality which is we might not need this because of how our tour is set up or how we're operating in this space. So I kind of think that that's a promoter to manager conversation, and it needs to be normalized. And I also think normalizing calls between promoters and managers on the phone needs to happen, because a lot of the time it's in an email and then someone hasn't read the email properly, or it's just got lost in translation, or the promoter or the agent hasn't passed it on to the manager, or vice versa. And I think the promoter needs to feel free to give the manager a quick call and say, look, this is what it is, and kind of normalize communication between the teams. I think that would really help in a lot of situations.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that was really articulately put in the way that where I was saying earlier about the conversation needs to be more open across the full sphere in there. The only other things that I kind of wanted to move on to as well was the lead cycle of booking, because it seems to have changed. COVID seems to have pushed on, the cycle of booking, not only from where we book 6 months in advance, 9 months, but now we're looking at shows where I'm booking into 2022. The cycle is slightly out of sync with the recording industry when an album's going to be released. In a new world where the manager's got to think about when does everything end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Can I add one thing to the rider before we move on?
Of course.
Just because, so part of the document that John and I were working on, definitely stresses what you need and not what you want, and it's so aggravating to me that it's totally standard to have 6 packs of Fosters on your rider, but there's not a safe space to get changed, you know, like really simple things like, is there a door? Is there somewhere where I can get changed? Is there a sanitary bin? You know, really basic things that make venues and shows like an inclusive, safe environment for everyone. That's what I wanted to add.
A very, very good point. We talked about having much shorter, simpler contracts. We understand why the contracts are so big, because every agent and artist and promoter has been through a thing where, I don't know, there wasn't enough security, there wasn't this or there wasn't that, but they've expanded into these massive contracts, which we understand that they're done in good purpose, but they end up being too long. And Roxanne's point spot on. We want to kind of get rid of all that so that it's really clear, so people do read them because they're short and it does tell you what you actually need, because we're all really busy, and that communication gets lost.
Again, though, something that the agent would get beaten over the head with if the contract was not watertight. So again, it's like there's this balance between getting what's covering everyone.
But we've come up with some solutions for that. So one of the solutions, for example, is we would have a criteria of AIP membership would be that we would sign some general terms and conditions with AT&C, which would be the lengthy ones, which all of our members would have to adhere to. So then when you were booking Roxanne, you would just send Roxanne's needs, right? And the moment that anybody broke that, that's their expulsion. But the point is that within AIP, they wouldn't, because they're good promoters, right? They're not the kind of fly-by-night. And then if you get some new person who arrives, you send them the long one, right? Until such time as they become a trusted member. So there are ways to do it in the same way that we trust everybody at the agency. You know, we know that the artists that you're going to send us are going to do lots of good things, because you wouldn't take them on as an agent. That's your role.
Sure. I just we could argue back and forth on this for a while, but if there is something wrong in the contract and there's something that's not been fulfilled, it is the agent ultimately that would get hit over the head with that contract, saying, why wasn't this clause included? So yeah, there's maybe more to debate on that.
Yeah.
Conscious that time's moving a little bit, so I wanted to explore, like I say, the new what will next year look like. The next, what is a new cycle going to look like? Are we out of sync with touring and album releases? How can we go down? Should there be more collaboration? Will next year, with everyone fitting previous shows from this year into 2021 and moving on, be more oversaturated? And is that considered from an artist, an agent, a manager and a promoter point of view? The data that we're getting says that from various surveys says that audiences want to come back later, artists want to get on the road sooner, promoters want to take less risks, and where is the responsibility with getting artists on the road? Where does that lay? Because if promoters don't want to take the risk, or venues don't want to open, whose responsibility is it? So it's just a couple of different aspects there to think about before we bring up some of the questions very quickly.
Well, promoters do want to take the risk. It's just they can't afford to, because they've had their income wiped out. Because we've talked about the economics of putting on those shows are difficult at all levels. But the responsibility, that's the thing. We all want, everybody in this room wants it. If you're a venue in Hereford, you exist because you want people to come to shows. If you're a promoter, you want to book shows on, artists want to tour, agents want to, we all want it to happen. What is it going to look like? I mean, our survey, we've done a survey of promoters. We've had over 300 promoters fill that survey in, and they're saying at the moment they don't expect to see any kind of level of shows until the spring. But that doesn't even mean they're fully back in business, because obviously only some venues may be open. And to be a promoter, like we said, for some promoters, you need bigger shows to kind of cover the research and development, the risk of the smaller shows. And it doesn't look like they'll open in that way. We don't know how things are going to open. We might have some theatres back because seated shows might come back quickly, but we might not be all able to gather in a small grassroots venue. I mean, we don't know. And like you said, you're booking for 2022.
So Sarah and Kaya, I'm interested to get your points on the booking cycle and where you think that's go, because there's a couple of questions in the side that I'd like to put on just before we finish, but I'm interested in the cycle and things like that.
Well, I mean, yeah, the cycle is.
Do you think that's a new normal? That's what I'm saying. Do you think that'll just carry on being 18 months ahead now? Or
I'd like to think that it will go back to normal and that it will resume in the sort of cyclical nature that it exists in. But I mean, ultimately, I guess because things have been so delayed and pushed back, and everything has now moved into spring 2021 or autumn 2021, there is going to be a massive oversaturate, like, you know, everything is majorly oversaturated in that time. So I think it's going to be a competitive year next year. I think what is hot will do really well. I think what is new might struggle a little bit, or at least, you know, suffer at the hands of there's just being so much music pushed into, or you know, the touring.
Do you think that needs to be reflected in fees then, or risks, and understood from, and sometimes from an agent's point of view or a manager's, that they should be saying to promoters sometimes, I don't think this risk is very fair right now for you. Maybe you need to reevaluate it. So there's a two-way process.
I think it's a case-by-case basis. You know, if you've got a really hot act that is in development, you're going to still expect the promoters to take a risk on them if they, you know, believe in the project and see that it's got the weight to hold in the future. But yeah, I think it does need to be a fairer and more open conversation. I
think what I'm getting at is there an affinity and a caring responsibility, not only for the manager on the artist or the agent on the artist, but actually right now we're all in this together. Without losing parts of the industry, we won't have the success in future. Yeah,
for sure. I think it's an open dialogue. I don't think anyone wants any, you know, music venues to suffer. No one wants to see anyone lose their jobs, especially partners that we've worked with for, you know, years. I think there is you know, everyone is trying to be supportive of each other, but there also has to be, you know, realistic that the artists have lost a massive income, the agents have lost a massive income, you know, everyone's suffering. So I think, you know, whilst we all need to support each other, we all need to be realistic as well and make sure that everyone is, you know, everyone's benefiting from it.
What we do is so important and so undervalued. And it's, you know, it was heartbreaking to see every single sector of the industry just suffer and just have their entire existence sort of taken away from one day to the next. And this is why I think it's just so important that we all speak with one voice to try and get our government to see that what we do is important and that we get support.
If we're talking about the grassroots, we've got to recognise, like, the 800 grassroots venues were, or, you know, loads of those venues. Some of those venues were already financially in trouble, and all of them at risk. From the survey that we've conducted of promoters, 47% have said that without financial intervention, once furlough ends, they will close. Right, and we know that agents have had no income at all as well. And then we know that other areas of the sector have been massively hit. It's unrealistic to then go back into that grassroots section with all of that and go, but we all somehow need to then recover from that and get paid more. It's not possible. So something else has to contribute to that change. So it has to be government through the, you know, through subsidies or through the Arts Council. It has to be those that are making money in the larger, whatever that is. I mean, certainly things like secondary ticketing. Can I just bring up something that I said yesterday when we were speaking, was that you know, certainly I'm going to bring up a question quickly that someone's also brought up, but that I made that analogy that in music we have seen a Nirvana t-shirt, we have seen a Rolling Stones t-shirt, we've seen a BRUDENELL Social Club t-shirt, we've seen, you know, labels, Heavenly Records or other records t-shirts, but for me the re-evaluation of culture needs to happen, and that we haven't seen, you don't see a Royal Opera House t-shirt, you don't see a
Northern Ballet t-shirt. You don't see the artist of them represented. So I think that we need to understand and shout about our long tail economy from music and how we can support it better. And I think together we need to do that and bond behind it, and how we bring up other sides of the economy. I'd just like to bring up a question just before we go that someone's brought in.
Wait, Joe.
Put this to John, maybe.
Do we think there's
well
a better way of promoters evidence and work other than we've done this now? We're trying to get our findings in the room. I guess. Well, I think that.
And that's to agents as well, and to everyone across the board, because actually, not just having what they call a business plan that someone puts forward in a standard template that doesn't mean anything really. You know, is there a way of rethinking that and assessing the intangibles that people put in?
I think it depends where you are on the promoter journey and who you are dealing with as an agent. So I think generally good promoters and good agents build relationships and work together, and they work together forever sometimes. Like a good agent will recognize somebody in an area that does a good job, and their version of good is whatever, it might be puts on a good show, it might be works really hard, it might be pays quickly, it might be whatever, it might be just someone that they really, they have an affinity with. And that's it, right? You don't have to necessarily do a plan. When you're trying to develop yourself and get onto the radar of agents and so on, that's a little bit different. And Sarah would be much better positioned to kind of say, well, to sort of describe how you choose who you don't work with. But I think once you get established as a promoter, I think the then difficult bit, and Joe is an established promoter, the harder bit is then a bit further along when the bigger companies come looking for your acts, right? And that's we're not talked about that much today, but there is a whole thing where somebody's been involved in developing an artist or putting on shows, probably losing money, and then a bigger company makes an offer. Now sometimes that's just on promoting, and sometimes it's a global deal.
I'm just conscious of time, and I think that the way you're going with that is there needs to be a new recognition of a level of loyalty in the industry, and certainly at a time where COVID, where venues are putting their own finances out to make other amendments to their venue, be it screens, hand sanitizer, X, Y, and Z, that everyone's got to put into, and that artists have different expectations when they come. Managers will expect things, and agents will. That everyone's having to put more into the costs, not necessarily on the balance sheet that you see it, but that will come into it. Like I say, hand sanitizer. Do those things need to be recognised? So is there going to be a level of loyalty in the industry from those that are taking the risks on a springboard in future? That'd be nice, but I think we just need to. I'm conscious that we're just a little bit over time, so a wrap up from each individual one. On the loyalty, on a fairer deal for all, on where we think the transparency of speaking from promoters, venues to management, and everyone in the ecosphere that needs to stick up for each other a little bit more rather than the bum fight within it. That's where I'd like to see it. A bit of solidarity together, shouting up for music versus all other art forms. So yes, over to you to finish. Who wants to go? Roxanne, artist.
Okay. Yes to everything you've just said, and thanks for having me. I think again, I just say that in this moment, it's just so important that we don't fragment. If one area of the industry suffers, then that's bad news for all of us. And there's nothing like live music, people coming together in a space to experience music together. And man, I really, really miss it. So in order to ensure that we can get back to that, let's do what we're starting here and really go back to the drawing board and see what really needs to improve and keep the dialogue going.
And KAIYA, from a manager's point of view, I think next in the chain from artist to manager.
From the management perspective, as Roxanne said, definitely we need to go back to the drawing board. I think normalizing conversations amongst all of the parties involved in this conversation outside of just the shows would be really helpful. Just on more, even if it's a monthly basis, that agents and promoters and managers and artists just have a chat. I think that would be really great. And yeah, thank you for having me. I think this has been a really important conversation. Same, it would be great to get back to some live shows.
Sarah?
Yeah, definitely. Let's hope this all gets done with quickly and we can all do the best. Yeah, I think it's about fair deals. I think it's about more conversations between people. It's about relationships and supporting and really championing their values. Also getting fair deals for artists, but at the same time being compassionate for everyone's needs. Yeah, I think that's all.
John, just to finish up, shall I?
Yeah, I just say that I think we recognise that all the conversations that we've been having through this time with like agents and managers and with artists represent, we all want to do the same thing. We all recognise how hard it's been, how hard it was and how hard it's been. And we recognise that things need to change. And we've got some idea about where that change might come from. So, and it comes from a few different things. One is government subsidies. And one is that our sector needs to work better at the top level to find ways to stop money talking all the time so that it can support its R&D arm and leg, which is where a lot of us work. But do it in a way that doesn't stop that ability for everybody to get paid and an artist to do well and choose to work who they want. But we've got to recognize the input that everybody makes, whether you're an agent or manager, the journey that you go on. And but there's a lot of good conversations, and this has been part of it, and there'll be some changes, and there are some changes happening already. And I think everything I've seen so far is in everybody's interest. It's good. I
think this has been a great conversation, that we've got all these different people into the room also, that these conversations don't happen as much, where there is managers in the room, there is agents in the room, and we can talk openly and frankly about it. So I'd just like to finish and say thank you for everyone coming today. We could probably have had this conversation for about 3 more hours and gone delve deeper. We've only just scratched the surface. And thank you. It'd be great. Appreciate everyone's time. And thanks for watching, everyone at home. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.